Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining this morning at URC. My name is Jennifer Bowser-Hurst. I'm the Project Director for Reading Within Reach, which is the Secretariat for the Global Reading Network. And welcoming you today. This is the first time since I've been here that we've touched on this topic. I've been here since last April. But it's exciting to talk about this topic of tracking books and getting books into schools the day after Mother Tongue Language Day, which, as we know, we're all have that shared goal of trying to get as many books into the hands of kids in local languages, and also the day after the launching of the Global Book Alliance. And I'm hoping that you saw a lot online about that, and you also were. I'm hoping some of you were able to participate in our discussions. Our community's done a lot in terms of supporting learning, supporting ministries of education, in terms of implementing their language policies, teacher professional development, assessment to measure project progress, improving the quality of textbooks, ensuring reading is a focus, and in community engagement. But we know to help children succeed, we have to get them the appropriate reading books in the languages that they will use and understand. And we know that teachers will strengthen their ability to teach reading and other subjects if they have more reading material to work with. This is a really challenging area to get into. I see Penelope's here, I'm really excited to see you because I know you really kind of were one of the incubators of getting this Global Book Alliance moving. But we saw yesterday the Global Book Alliance developing partnership with multilateral institutions, civil society organizations to get books in the hands of every child by 2030. They have technical working groups, and I'm going to let Linda Keeper discuss that later. But as this launch was approaching, my team, as well as the All Children Reading Grandchildren Challenge for Development team, the reading team at USAID, the All Children Reading team at USAID, Global Book Alliance, began to think about how can we bring our community together to bolster our efforts. Let's see where we are right now. Let's see what we can do to support each other in terms of moving forward. And so we brought together, we put the word out and tried to find as many implementers who were working on this track and tracing of books as we could. We invited others in the conversation who I hope are on the phone, some who are remote, including the World Bank and Blue Tree and others, and folks who are involved on committees with the Book Alliance, to just get back to understanding the status of where we are with initiatives, documenting what we've learned so far, identifying some of our barriers and impediments for using track and trace in the countries where we're working, and discussing solutions and finding out ways to partner. I'll come back after Rebecca talks and talk about our agenda for today, but but Rebecca really pushed this in terms of pulling it together, and so I'm going to give her a few minutes to talk about what she wants to accomplish.
So I'm Rebecca Rhodes. My business card says I'm a senior education advisor at USAID, and apparently I'm trying to help 100 million children learn how to read. So these strange things that happen to you when you wake up one morning and have had a change in your life. I am the COR of Jennifer's contract for Reach, and so yes, I was the person who said to Jennifer and to Rebecca Leahy and to Tony Bloom, who we're so glad can join us this morning, hey, we should get together and talk about what everyone is doing to track and trace books. And just for a tiny anecdote, when I was hired by Mike Laughlin at EDC, when he called me at 5 a.m, California time, to see if I'd be interested in a job, which of course I was, because I had a new immigrant husband and I was a graduate student who's not interested in a job. He said, I understand you know the country of Guinea well, and I need a distribution manager for 6 weeks to be sure that the books that EDC has printed in Conakry can get to every school in Guinea. Well, you just can imagine what that turned into. It turned into 6 weeks of the classic, books falling off the trucks stuck in the mud, schools we didn't know existed, getting books for schools that did exist, and then the school that existed wondered where its books were. It was a nightmare. It was all, a paper-based system. We had 30 or 40 layers of signatures that had to be done to make sure the books got to the right places, and even though we had done that, in the end of the day, as I was leaving the country, you go to the market to buy an orange and the books are for sale there in the market. So we've all lived that life, and that was 1994, and the concern here is that that's still happening somehow, and it's 2018. So there's been incredible work on the part of everybody here to try to figure out how we're going to get better tracking and tracing systems than what I was doing with my trucks and my paper and my signatures, in triplicate and quadruple in 1994 in Telemeli in Guinea. What are we going to do so that tracking books down to student use at a school is just standard operating procedure. It should just be easy, something we always have at hand, technology assisted in some way, and affordable to the point where USAID doesn't go, I can't pay for that. We should just get it done and pay for it. Tony is here. He can talk with Rebecca about the incredible work under All Children Reading Grand Challenge for the prize that was issued to develop a version of a software, or maybe 2 versions. I'm actually not sure how many we've alpha or beta tested, but they'll tell you. So there's that. But the other thing that I noticed at a recent event that we were all at the United States Institute for Peace, is that while that work has been going on, a lot of the other folks in the community have also been trying things, experimenting with things. I particularly knew, obviously, of EDC's work with Creative and the work in Nigeria, but then, I know that Chemonics also has, as part of your management systems, a way of tracking and tracing books. So we all have a little bit of the equation here. And the idea is not that we all have to use one single thing. The idea is that we come together to talk about what we are doing, what we do, and to find the cost efficiencies and the sort of models and methods that we know we want to continue, and to drop away from the stuff like I was doing in 1994, which we certainly do not want to continue. Even though I can think of at least 5 countries where we know that's happening right now, right? The truck in the mud, the paper in the little waterproof sack, and thousands of signatures that could have been, forged by anyone. It's not the greatest of systems. We must, in 2018, be able to come up with at least 3 or 4 other system ideas that aid could afford, and that countries particularly could afford, and that we could work together to habituate our ministries and our countries to using, to try to crack this nut of the constant pull of the non-transparency around what happens to the books. So everyone knows, Tony and Sunny particularly, I'm the last person to know what technology solution is a good one, but I think in the room we'll be able to come up with some ideas about what that might be, and some thoughts about how we move forward as a community. What should USAID be saying in solicitations? What should partners working with ministries be talking about with curriculum departments and statistics and planning groups that are in charge of getting books out to the field? And what can we really promise our parents and our kids about how their essential reading books are going to get to them? So that's what I hope we can just spend a morning having coffee and talking about. I don't think any grand decisions will come out of today. It's really meant to be a technical discussion that can move us just that next piece forward. Before I stop talking, which I really am eager to do, I have to make sure that everyone knows my incredible team, the USAID reading team. So just starting at this table, Tony Bloom, everybody knows Tony, our Senior Education Advisor for Technology. We stole him. He's not officially on paper assigned to the reading team, but we stole him anyway. So he's here. Linda Hebert, our advisor for the Global Book Alliance, long-suffering, ! Brooke Esty is also long-suffering right along with Linda in the Global Book Alliance. And then someone I think fewer of you may have met, Rebecca Martinez, our instructional program advisor, now for 3 months. We started her off early on an assignment on Somalia, phasing in of her work, and then also just had her go off to Ethiopia, so she's just back from there. And her job on the team is now much like what I tried to do for Penelope, only she does it better than I did, which is to advise programs in the field on how they can move forward instructionally so the kids can succeed. But without the books, they can't. So have a seat, guys. Let's figure this out. Let's trace these things down to the kid.
Thank you. And I also just wanted to make sure I introduce our REACH team, which is here with us today. Allison Flipson, who's our reading specialist, Deepa Shankataya, who's our senior researcher, Andre Lafleur is our operations manager, Richard is our project coordinator and our cruise director today with the Zoom. And I also wanted to just make sure I point out Rebecca Leahy and Sunny Lacey from ACR, Children Reading Grand Challenge for Development. So there are a lot of great experiences in the room. There's quite a few people, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to introduce everybody at the moment, but I at least wanted to give a chance for the USAID projects who have done some work in this area to talk. And we have a bunch of partners joining us, and they're here and they're online. So we thought we would spend around the next hour just kind of doing a discovery, kind of moving around the room and understanding what work is out there, what's been done, where you are in your efforts. And we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back together and have some small group discussions around 3 different areas: on software design and functionality, on capacity building and change management, and community engagement. So, and that'll be a chance for you to introduce yourselves a little bit more to each other and hear more about what's happening. So we're going to give each of our partners who are going to share what they're doing this morning about, I think we ended up with sort of 5 presentations. So I'm going to give them each about 7 minutes to share what they're doing. They provided me slides. I didn't edit their slides, so so I'm just sharing what they sent. And I do know that we have at least 2 others. If they're on the phone, I'll just check while people are talking to make sure they're on the phone, that I did want to speak up. As though they're not working within USAID, they may have some interesting things to share as well.
My name is Sarah Anderson. I work for John Snow, Inc. We're actually a public health organization, and I've worked for a long time in supply chains for public health. But we have been working with our sister organization, World Education, on looking at supply chains for education. And so in 2015 or 16, we were awarded, we were one of the grantees for the All Children Reading program to create a tool for tracking and tracing. There was 2 organizations. And we did a small pilot in Malawi with that software. And now we've gone on and we're actually trying to expand it into Cambodia. It's the global partnership with World Bank and USAID, the trust fund. And so that has also a part of results-based financing, using the track and trace and using results-based financing as part of that as an incentive to use the system. In Malawi, we just did it with the system itself. Maybe I can start describing how the system works. The idea with the system was to try and find a way to reach schools and communities. So one of the big key design of the system, which I actually think USAID came up with this idea, and not us, but was the idea to have parents and school committees involved in the system so that they too could advocate, they could get information on books. And so we really had to think about a technology that could reach the lowest level where maybe there was only very basic technology available. So for the first track and trace, the lowest common denominator for us was sort of SMS or interactive voice response. And so the first system that we created used SMS and interactive voice response at the lowest level, where parents and teachers could register for the system and they could get notifications that, you know, X number of books have been dispatched from the warehouse and they're due at your school by this date, and that would give parents an ability to watch out, did the books arrive, go and have a look at the school, and they could send messages back saying, you know, where are our books, we haven't received them yet, and that sort of thing. It also had the functionality from the warehouse where we use barcoding for orders, so the warehouse could quickly dispatch using a barcode. It could quickly also be tracked through the different intermediary points where couriers and delivery folks could also use the barcodes to say, you know, it made it to the district or it made it to some kind of intermediary point. So this first slide sort of describes what we did in Malawi, and I just put some pictures there. We went out and we created the prototype under that award, and we did a small field test in Malawi, which we did with World Vision and USAID and the Malawi Ministry of Education. We all got to follow the tracks and see how the system was used. And we found that we trained parents and school teachers. We found many of the parents, you know, didn't necessarily use SMS in their daily life. So there was a certain part of that where we had to teach them how to use another functionality on their phone. They owned phones, but they didn't necessarily use that. They also, and then we also started using the interactive voice. But in Malawi, we found that they didn't want to use interactive voice. They really wanted SMS. That was a big finding in Malawi. So the next slide just sort of shows, so this is sort of showing the dashboard on track and trace, so you can actually track through a map, and underneath it has the status of the delivery. At schools, they can also report if it's delayed, if it's missing, if it was incorrect, and the little bubbles that come up off the map, they show the different colors depending on the delivery. So it not only shows whether or not it finally made it to its final destination, but did it make it in the right quantity and the right condition. And so the bit on the side there just sort of shows the different steps that we used in Malawi, where the shipments were entered at the central level. They were then packed and barcoded and scanned at the warehouse. And then there was different scanning throughout the system. At the final delivery point at the school, they would also send an SMS to say they received it, and the parents would be registered to say it's been delivered, and they could go and check at the school to see whether it really made it. So now in Cambodia, we've just started working in Cambodia. Well, it was since last July, but it's taking its time, as these things do. And so this one was to scale up the same idea, but to 400 schools, and to add the results-based financing to the model. And so in Cambodia, World Education has a presence there for a very long time, so they have a lot of relationships. So they are managing it on the ground, and JSI is supporting them in terms of the technology. And we're working with the Ministry of Education and a lot of the other local implementing partners. And so for the last 6 months, we've been going through a process. We did a baseline assessment and really went out and had a look at what was going on in Cambodia. We looked at how they were using technology in Cambodia so that we could make it more appropriate to the context. And then we sat with the Ministry of Education and with their printing and distribution house, which is their autonomous printing publishing house that also does all the distribution, and went through and mapped sort of the requirements for the system. And so we're now at the stage where we're customizing the system we'd already created for the Cambodia context, and hoping to start training in the next month or so. And just to say that the results-based financing is mostly targeting, one, the distributors, so we're trying to track their performance through the system using track and trace. Previously, they've just done it through trying to track pieces of paper, like you said, and spot checks. So we're hoping to try and encourage them that, what we want is to see receipts from every school in the country, not the 10% that you check for the paper system. So we're working with the ministry on that, and part of that is really that can be part of our behaviour change conversation. Some of that is old and hard to change, but that's what we're hoping TNT can really about. And then we're also working with school committees. We feel we need to try and incentivize them, and this will be a very low cost kind of incentive, where we just say, this school gets an award for having the most school committee members involved and engaged in the system and sending information to the system. So this is just, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I wanted to just highlight a few things that are different in Cambodia. One is that they really wanted to also focus on collecting data to help with calculating orders. So it's not just a distribution system, but it starts at the request. And part of the, when I sat down and mapped out their process in Cambodia, it was taking them a good 2 years from the point of ordering to the delivery. And part of that was because all the paper forms came up, then someone sat for 6 months and entered them into Excel, and then they created a thing, and then they started the procurement, and so there was a long process. So we said, let's use the technology to get the data there quicker. And also to help, the schools were doing this long, complicated calculation for doing the projections, and we're hoping we can use the technology to our advantage to do those projections. And then otherwise, the other thing that was added in Cambodia, which was also something that we noted in Malawi, was something we wanted, was the spot checking of classrooms post-distribution. And so we're adding in spot checks where the SSC members, maybe a month after delivery, they'll receive a message and we'll say, can you go to the classrooms, count how many books are in the hands of students. And so we hope that adds a little bit of visibility to the system.
Sarah, how long did the baseline assessment take in Cambodia?
The actual data collection itself was only about a month. But then that was more the process.
The adaptations come after that.
And then the adaptation. So we had to analyze the data, and then we had to sit with the ministry, and that took. So one thing that I did want to point out that was very different in Cambodia was that Cambodia, many people have smartphones, and they have definitely leapfrogged SMS. We found that nobody, even those with basic phones, was using SMS. some of the higher up levels who also had smartphones, they would use SMS, but very few people with basic phones use SMS. So we decided to use a different combination in Cambodia, and one of the big things that came out in Cambodia was the use of messaging through Facebook and through Telegram. And so we are looking at using a chatbot in Cambodia, and in particular, so one of the big challenges we think with this system is for school directors and principals who have to order or have to interact with the system. They don't interact very often. They maybe interact once or twice a year. And so we wanted to avoid having applications for them, because we were concerned that between users, they could get a new phone, they could lose the application, they could delete the application. And so that would be a real training challenge for us. And so we want to have a system where the school directors instead receive a message through Facebook Messenger, and through that they can follow a link and they can do their ordering through the Facebook, because we don't think they'll change their Facebook account. So we're really working on the chatbot. That's the biggest change there. For the school committee members, we're trying to use voice.
What's the saturation of Facebook in Cambodia?
I didn't put it there. Okay, basically anybody who had a smartphone was pretty much 1 for 1. If you had a smartphone, you were using Facebook. Many of the ministry itself uses Telegram. They think it's more official. And so you could do it in Telegram as well, but that was only really to the district level Telegram. It wasn't reaching the school directors. And so otherwise, I think I've covered pretty much all of that on the side. And then,
Okay, sure. So, no, go ahead.
Okay.
You can finish last.
Is there one more slide?
It's loading.
High tech here.
Right.
In Malawi and in Cambodia, are there towers for cell phones to operate at every school?
Oh, a tower? No. Like is there connection?
Cell phones operative at the school level, especially at the rural and remote areas.
Cambodia is less of a problem. They have very, very good network. I would say in Malawi it's much harder. But I worked in Malawi for other systems as well, and it's amazing how resourceful people can be to send an SMS message if they want to. And so I've heard of people, they know that if they go over there, they can send their message. It's one of the benefits of SMS. So they generally prefer that to. So I was asked I tried to give you some costs. I do want to just give a caveat that, it really does depend on what kind of technology the country decides to use, how many messages they want to send per person, all those sorts of things. So this, I'm sort of just basing on where we're at with Cambodia. It'll be more expensive when there's less schools, and it starts to get economies of scale once the schools increase. So the system that we're using is actually using a program called TarraWorks that then interfaces with Salesforce. And TarraWorks is an app for data collection. And that's the main thing that we use. It has barcoding and has been used in a number of different sectors for supply chain type work. And so we use that for the kind of tracking of the boxes. And then at the lower level, the chatbot, it doesn't cost anything once it's in place, but you do have to pay something to obviously set it up. And then there's the voice costs. And then I tried to give a kind of idea on, it's not that too difficult to use. So on the whole, we're just training the school and the community members in one day. And we're training them together. And then we're using the district and provincial staff to be their trainers. And our other implementing partners in country. And then at the district level, we're doing a 2-day training for them to learn what they have to do and also to learn how to train the school level. The warehouse, it only takes them about a day as well. It's a fairly straightforward training. And then the central level would be more of an ongoing mentoring program of how do you manage the system, how do you use the data, that sort of thing. So I hope that's helpful.
Fantastic.
I'm
was just wondering what the response rate was from the community and parents, like how many folks were registering and
I mean, we only did it in Malawi and in 2 schools.
oh,
So it was a little, we haven't really got a good sense yet of how well the schools will react. In Cambodia, we're bringing 3 or 4 to the training. So we know we'll have them registered.
So in that experience of working with those 2 schools communities, you mentioned that nobody was using SMS or very few. I mean,
Right.
what's the literacy rate of people even to use SMS and what kind of function?
Yeah, I mean, so the way that the system set up was it was a very clear message. So we would give them, we would have a little poster on the wall that had like exactly what they had to put in. One of the biggest challenges I found was that we had used letters and word and numbers. And the biggest challenge they had was getting between a number and a letter.
But even at each school, what do you envision in terms of how many people you actually need to do it? It's just one person you need, or?
I think it's better to have more than one.
Absolutely, yeah. But
Yeah.
what did you have a plan around sort of what?
Well, like in Cambodia, we're trying for 4,
Okay.
or 3 or 4, and we're also like, I don't know whether this is the same in other countries, but understanding is that it's often like more of the elderly folks in the community who become part of school committees. It certainly is in Cambodia, so they're really not very technology savvy. And so we're trying to actually match them with a student from the 6th grade or some other younger people who will also be like their buddy. And so they'll both collect the message, and then for the spot checks, the idea would be that they would go together and do the spot checks together, thinking that they're not really going to do it themselves. Sort of how it's trying to.
Hello? Do we have any questions? Oh, thank you for raising your hand. And who do we have on the phone?
Yes, hi, this is Shubhana Susli. Sorry, I've just emerged again, firefighting. I have a quick question about the track and trace discussion that's ongoing. Has this to do with tracking and tracing at the distribution point at the beginning of the procurement phase? Or is it about tracking and tracing after the books have been delivered to schools, and you're tracking and tracing to make sure they're not being resold? Which part of the discussion are we on? Because I think there are different shades here of tracking and tracing that may be useful to understand. Thank you.
Hi, Shabana, Rebecca, thanks for joining. So right now, in the course of the morning, we're just giving folks a chance to say what they have done at any end of the supply chain so far. We're kind of getting a sense of where our communal work is in our different countries and our different programs. I don't know of any system that has focused very much on the early parts of the procurement process. I know Sarah was mentioning the projections for repeat distributions, which is obviously a portion of that. But this is still, despite the fact that we've all been struggling for this, you know, for the entire course of our careers, this work around technology-assisted tracking and tracing and projecting and ordering and procuring is still fairly young. So we'll hear from one of the big portions of the morning, or one of the big ideas today is to hear from everyone who is willing to share their work. So we'll hear from a few other folks in the next couple of minutes about what they have done. And then we'll be able to talk about, you know, what the systems have covered so far, and maybe things they haven't covered enough, like the ordering phase, the counting how many you need, the procuring at the central level. You know, we really need complete track and trace systems that will make sure that no book, ever gets lost or resold. So the ambition is large, but the work is still very young. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you, that's helpful.
My name is Munir Mahomar, and I work with Education Development Center and with monitoring and evaluation and related to technology. My area of work. We want to share this presentation on the project that we worked with in Nigeria. It's called Northern Education Initiative Plus. And it is in 2 states, the state of Bauchi and Sokoto, in northern Nigeria. We have to distribute more than 7 million books. So far, we have distributed about 7.9 millions to 2,400 schools and 8,000 non-formal schools, mostly early grade from 1 to 3rd grade. And also build capacity, work together with the Ministry of Education. Next slide, please. So initially, we started focusing on technology. So our first approach was, okay, let's start creating an online database, use SMS to different checkpoints, use barcodes. So we printed barcodes on the shipment nodes. We tried to replicate a complex checkpoint tracking. Like, we wanted to know when was the shipment at the warehouse, when was it packed, when was it delivered. But we tried twice, two delivery tries, and we started to getting some technology rejections, mostly from the SMS part. It was, okay, we used SMS to try to send the status of the shipments or of the checkpoints, because there was no electricity at the warehouse. There was no way to use. It was the warehouse. They don't have floors. They're dirt. They just. It's hard to work for using different technologies. We had those infrastructural limitations, and we found that there were too many stakeholders involved in the process. We had that sustainability to train the Ministry of Education, the different state partners, but we found out that from the procurement to the school, to the head teacher, there were too many teams involved, too many actors, and no one was clear on what they were supposed to do with all this technology that we started trying to make use of. So we planned something, and then we found out that there was not a possibility to send directly the books, to ship them all the way to the schools. The head teachers came to the districts or the local government areas to pick the books. So we had to change our technology or our checkpoints to make it different. Next slide, please. So we started using technology. At first, like I mentioned, online database. We had issues with the internet. We couldn't access internet or at different places. So we changed to include three things: people, process, and technology. The first thing we started to do was organize the distribution process from the procurement to the school in using modeling techniques like business process management techniques to actually draw the whole process map from start to finish, including which teams were involved, internal or external, what were their roles, what they needed to do, and we even draw step-by-step tasks, as you could see on the slide where the cross-functional diagram is. So we tried to sit down with every team and understand the way they worked, the way this was used to work on the Ministry of Education before, and how to enhance it using a few things on technology. We concentrate also on the people, helping them work together, collaborate, capacity building, and adding some skills to their knowledge. But we try to then rethink our technology approach. So instead of trying to build a system for them to use, we tried to look at what existing tools they already knew and were comfortable with. So we started using Excel as our source for the distribution list, and we built like a super Excel template that had multiple formulas so that it was easier for the different states teams to just add the enrollment that they needed, and that Excel file mixed with mail merge that everybody knows how to use, Excel and Word, we're able to create the whole shipment distribution process, starting with an Excel distribution list, printing the shipment list, including barcodes with Word, and then uploading that distribution list into a tablet so that we could do offline data collection. What was very important here is that once they started using the tablets, we got an Excel file back from the offline tablets. So we connected both files, the distribution and the Excel file, and created a dashboard, a performance or project dashboard that would show the status at each point, which schools have already come pick up the books, which schools have not. So we kept everyone involved. We already knew the process, who was involved, internal and external teams. So everybody could have access to this progress dashboard. Everybody was on top, trying to understand what were the issues. And this, keeping informed everybody of the different steps, really helped change the different pictures of what we tried to use a lot of technology before. So we emphasized our design on reporting to all the teams involved, so the different steps, using two basic things, Excel and offline tablets, and connecting that to a reporting dashboard that helps everybody understand what were the status. This was the third trial, and it worked seamlessly without any issues. Everybody knew what they needed to do. They were part of the design on the processes and the different skills that everybody understood. And we even documented what were the formats, what were the types of documents they needed to go through the process. After that, we load that final Excel file into our online database, and everybody saw what was going on. So the process worked this time because we didn't just concentrate on technology, but on the processes, step-by-step clear roles of what everybody needed to do, not only including the project teams, but the state partners, the different, we had to work with the warehouse, bookkeepers, the education officers, the support officer, everyone involved was part of the design of the different process. We didn't just emphasize using technology. We tried to use not the simplest technology, but what technology the different people were used to, and it worked offline. It worked from a laptop at any place, and they could generate both the distribution list, print out the shipment notes, and track. And this was our third try. We are now doing our sixth distribution, and it has been working seamlessly. Everybody knows what to do, and everybody's clear on this process. So that's my presentation.
Time for about one or two questions if anybody has any about.
What was the scale of your distribution?
We have to distribute to 2,400 schools, but each state, we have 2 states, and each state distributes to 10 local governments, like 10 districts. So what we tracked was from the printer to the state, then to the local governments, and at the local governments, each teacher, each head teacher went to pick up the books, because there was no way for the ministry to send the books directly to the schools. The infrastructure was, so every local government came, and it's not that big quantities for each school. Some schools had enrollment from 30 to 100 students. So they came in, usually they came in their own cars or taxi, those motor taxis, and they picked up the books and take them to school. So we verified with the head teacher that they got the books. After, what we're starting to do is, during our classroom observations, they're adding a few questions to our observations to figure out if the students are down to that level, to figure out if the students are actually using the books that they got, if the teacher did take the books to the school. We gave the books to the teacher at the district level, and at some points the reading coordinators took the books to a closer place, a smaller cluster, so other but still the teachers were the ones who pick up the books. So it was about 2,400 schools that they're doing right now. Yes.
So for Nigeria and also for Cambodia, I'm curious to know where the responsibility of the printer ended for distribution.
It's actually it should end at the quality of the books received by the LGAs and by the states. But right now, the distribution from the printers, they give the books to the state office, to the state warehouses. That's where it ends. And then the ministry take charge and they distribute it with their own trucks and staff.
In Cambodia, the contract is to the school, but we found that they were not really doing that. They do rely on the districts in the same way. The schools come and collect. And what they do is the printing house gives some money. They have agents at the district that they task with. Yeah, so they give them supposedly some allowance, and they're also meant to give money to the schools for their transportation. A lot of what we heard was that often didn't happen. So that it is something that I hope through some visibility that they might talk about a bit more, because they put that in the contract for the printing and distribution house, but they're not really tracking that they're really getting into the schools. So.
Did anybody online have a question they may want to ask? To unmute yourself. Rebecca has a question.
I have to ask this question. This is amazing, and thank you. And for those of us who've been to northern Nigeria, thanks for all the work, both from Creative, EDC, and the prior work under other partners. It's going to be a long time till we get northern Nigeria sorted. But can you give us any information on cost, approximate amounts of money doing this might cost?
The short answer is not really. So, so yeah, because this activity was embedded in all the entire project activities, and because there are multiple partners working on this project in multiple places, so it's really hard, to try and suss out which pieces of whose budget would be without having sort of prior sat down and figured that out. So I don't know that we could give you a cost per book at this point.
I mean, we're always happy for things to happen for free. So.
Yeah, and it's a lot of staff labor costs. I mean, what it is, because the ministry does the trucks, the whole thing. So, so it's mostly staff labor costs. It's, it's that database which we've created for the entire M&E. So this is just one piece of it. So it's not separate from the rest of the project. Thanks. Sorry, and Munir, did you want to say?
I just wanted to add that the cost actually was using tablets and Excel files. It was more efficient for them to use and learn how to use those already known technologies than coming in with we already did come in with a big online cloud database, and and not only because of them, I know that they can learn, but the infrastructure we weren't able to use online at the warehouse or track, so it was.
Yeah, I remember my trips to northern Nigeria. I can picture what you're talking about.
Yes. One more question, and we have to go on to another.
I just want to make sure I understood the story right. Was the bulk of the effort of the tracking and tracing from the state warehouses to the district offices, or so the barcode wasn't tracking it all the way to the school? And I'm trying to figure out at what point, what which part of the tracking was the distributor to get to the state warehouse, if any, and which was from the state warehouse to
Yes,
districts?
the printer just took the books to both states' warehouse.
And there was no tracking or tracing at that point. It was
Just the receipt of the books there. And we did check that we got the amount, the bulk books that we, from the state to 10 LGAs at each state, we dragged those. I was actually with, during the state distribution, they take the books to one truck, and what we did differently was make sure that there was this committee or TLM, the book distribution committee, that one person from the staff, from the project staff, and one person from each of these local governments, they were physically available during the packing of the books and taking these books to their districts, usually 1 or 2 hours, depending on the distance of the district. They took the districts down to the local government warehouse, which is actually just a small classroom, and that in there, the next day they called all the teachers to come pick up the books, and that's where we used, at both places, we used tablets to track the shipment from the state to those local governments. And at the local governments, when each teacher was picking up the books, we used the tablets to validate the amount of books that they had and the signature of their teachers. We did try to change something this time, is that the first 2 tries, the involvement of the ministry, they were less accountable at first, the first 2 tries. So they didn't give us the shipment notes signed by the teachers like 2 months later. This time, they were more, we were more involved in getting the shipment notes signed at that moment when the teacher was picking up the books, and we were able to track those and put them on the dashboard, which teachers had come to pick up those books. We did figure out that when the state was in charge of doing this, they kind of decided at some point to change the amount of books, like changing the total number of books for one school or for the other ones. So we took the
Based on.
yeah. So we decided that the shipment note was for them like an invoice. If you wanted to change that shipment note or the amounts, you needed to do another process of changing that invoice. That was a legal invoice that they were receiving, that amount of books, so that nobody changed that during the process. So we tried to make sure that they didn't change the amount of books that the teachers were receiving. If they needed more books or less books, then we did another process to change that at that moment, but not let them change the numbers there.
And how often did they say they needed fewer books?
Every time they picked up. So they said they needed more.
More. I can't imagine why. What would I do with more books?
Thank you.
Creative Associates, are you in the room? There you go. We have your program here, and we'd love for you to share a little bit about your.
We have 2 people here, Kate and I, from the Creative Development Lab at Creative Associates, and also several people who are actually online, including Susan, Corey, and Karen from the Afghanistan, Mozambique, and actually Nigeria project too. But Kate's going to do the presentation. So.
Great. You can just go to the next slide. This is just a picture of some books. And that's the bus that we delivered. In the warehouse, in the bus that we ended up delivering them in. So we're running track and trace in 2 different projects currently. Afghan Children Read is the one that I presented on in the fall, and is our biggest example. So we've been running this. Our initial pilot was last March, so we're now in our 4th delivery round right now. We tracked deliveries last March, in June, in November, and we're getting ready to track a delivery in the next couple of weeks also. We're also in talks with the ministry to scale the process nationally. So we have worked in over 560 schools in 4 provinces, just for this. So we are working in all of the schools that we work in for the project currently. So as the project is expanding, we're expanding our track and trace. Our initial pilot was 251 schools and 43 community-based education centers, which was all of the schools that our project was in at the time. Vamos Ler is in Mozambique, so we're actually just getting started here. We just actually finished delivery yesterday. I got confirmation like 5 in the morning that all the books have been delivered, so we only did an initial pilot. You can't see, but it's only in 21 schools for this round, and so we kind of had a very small focused pilot. So 21 schools in 2 zips in each of the 2 provinces that we're in northern Mozambique. So we're in Zambezia and Nampula. So materials that we delivered was grades 1 through 3 in Daria and Pasto. Our main strategies were to work with the ministry groups that had already been existing with our project, and then some school level engagement, so some co-design during our initial scoping. As you can imagine, it's very difficult to co-design in Afghanistan, but we did get some principals and some stock keepers actually come to our compound, and we were able to work with them and sort of, I have a picture in the next slide, but so that was sort of validated, and we've tried to do like a validation process because it is difficult to kind of do like wide user testing of any of these technologies. That was sort of our approach there. The technology, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next slide, we're just calling it Book Tracker at the moment. It's an iteration of one of our data collection applications called Creative Mapper. It has we did a lot of like custom feature building with our vendor that we have like a corporate agreement with, and so that was great because we had a lot of flexibility in the types of features, especially language and how we could sort of build the interaction to fit the user. In Vamos Ler, we're also doing workbooks, teacher materials, grades 1 through 3 in Portuguese and 3 local languages. So there are a ton of supplementary materials as well. Our strategies here, so we did a scoping mission in the fall and have been extensively involved with and speaking with the district level officials. That's sort of our main point of contact, especially through the project. And then also at the central ministry, just getting a sense of how they do procurement, how they do ordering, how they, digitize things from paper and typing them into spreadsheets at this random office in Maputo, and that takes many months. So, I think there's a lot of like very similar experiences, right? And so just talking with them to see, what would actually make the process go faster. One thing I wanted to highlight in Vamos Ler that was, I felt like it made a big impact but wasn't necessarily very technology heavy, was that we found that in Mozambique, the schools are separated into zips. They're zones of pedagogical influence. And so there's like 4 to 7 schools in a zip, and there's a leader school. So the leader schools get the deliveries from the districts, and then the leader schools are responsible for getting the schools to the other schools. And so the schools that aren't leader schools only grow up to like grade 3, right? It's just primary. And so they were having a lot of trouble keeping track of that. I have pictures, I didn't include them, of just literally posters on the wall with like drawn out, like trying to keep track of like when they had been delivered, how many books are at each school, those sorts of things. So, so we're working with them to provide those materials, right? That was a direct ask of the leader schools. And to provide them better paper tracking materials for tracking within their own zip. So again, not technology heavy because they don't need it, but it was a cool thing that came out of it. So for these bug track or track and trace applications, we focus on, there is an app, but also we have an SMS and IVR interactions built. So so this is the picture of a school principal and his stock keeper testing out in our office in Kabul. So we do have an online dashboard. That's where you would upload the Excel sheet of the distribution list. We do track at the school level. So each record is a school, how many books per title, per grade, per language, it's a long record, is uploaded prior to delivery. And so we actually worked with our vendor in Afghanistan to label all of the books before they went out. So they were labeled per school. So we were able to do that. One though, keep in mind that we did only do this in 354 schools for the first round. And so we have expanded, but it's been a manageable size to have our vendors do this at not a huge cost increase. And so when the books do get to the districts and then to the schools, they are labeled by school already. So that's not the case in Mozambique, right? We have different vendors. Some are international. So when all the books come together, someone has to sort them and label them if we are going to track at the school level. So that's something that we're also working through. So I included a few screenshots of the app. I also have it on my phone if you're interested in looking at it. But it basically works on a barcode scanner. So once all the distribution information is uploaded, when you scan the barcode, all that information comes up on the screen so that district official or project staff can then validate it. We also do inside of the books before they leave, and we check them for damage. It also triggers notifications. So we have daily status reports. This also is like on a web page that you can refresh whenever you want, but it does send it at 7 a.m. Kabul time. And we're working on more graphs, because they like graphs. Everyone likes graphs. And we also have like alert emails. So this one example is 2 books are reported as damaged. For this ID, it gives you the school name, the principal name, and the principal phone number so that our staff can then call to validate that. So we're trying to build in actionable reports. We also have SMS status updates that go out. So when the books are registered in the province and when they get to the district, every time, once a record is uploaded from our staff, that sends an SMS update to the school. So we have all the phone numbers of the stockkeepers and the principals, so they get notifications where their books are and what the suspected date of delivery is. And so, yeah, that's and anything damaged or any loss is also that triggers actual email reports to our staff. So that's everything that was on my slides. But also happy to talk more about it, happy to show you. So, take questions.
The question I have is about the forms that you helped them develop to track the books in Mozambique. Could you please share a little bit about that system?
Sure. So, we have forms at the different levels. So basically, we have like a distribution flow, and it gives you an example of like what type. You're not going to be able to read from there, but it gives you an example of the type of information we're collecting at each level, the province level, district check. The first one is the contents check, right? So they're checking against the label to make sure that the book actually has what it says, that the box actually has what it says is in there. And then at the province, we're making sure that the correct books the province got there, at the district, which only happens in Mozambique, same thing. And then at the school level, the Motimads use an SMS interaction to report that they got the correct number of boxes too. So the total number of boxes is printed on each label for that school. So that's sort of how we were tracking to make sure. Our original idea was to track at the box level. That quickly became untenable. So that was our solution, was to track the number of boxes per school so that we could make sure that, they didn't just get one box and they're reporting complete delivery, but that they have all of them. So for the forms, it's, basic. Are any of the boxes damaged? If so, what kind of damage? How many more boxes do they need? We also ask the principals and Motimads to report any additional books that they might need, and then we have our project staff follow up with them.
And how could you check against the report that it is actually whatever they state, it is what it is?
So we have our project staff call each principal to confirm.
Was hoping that you would share some of the costs.
Oh, yes, yes, absolutely. So I can give you some overviews. So basically, we do have a corporate agreement with Geospatial. So the cost for Afghanistan was a $14K blanket sort of enterprise account, and then we it was I think 3 cents per SMS and 0.02 cents of each data transaction. So we have buckets of data. I also have that actual information, so I can share that with you guys. Did you want to add?
Sure. So we used a logistic company that's already doing supplies in the commercial sectors. They do that in Latin America with DHL. any ice cream that you eat in the US, actually, they track and trace that from Nestle and others. But it was great that we were able to get this company to actually do a whole bunch of features that would be relevant for our context, right? Because most commercial companies we talk to, they're like, we're not going to put this in Dari and Pashto. We're not going to, basically build SMS interaction features. So, but also we had to change their business model and pricing model. So when you do an annual licensing structure, and that was basically the 14K, and then the way we've set up the costs are transactional. So, if you're using SMS for verification, they'll roll in any additional costs that they have on top of just the SMS cost, and then provide it as that. So that's a little bit more, I think, more digestible for a project, and also a better way to price a structure we have found with technology vendors than, large blanket prices to make it more transactional.
But that 14K covered the whole year, which was 2.5 deliveries also.
Yolanda has a question.
Yeah, this is for Afghanistan. How do you reach to the CVEs? And do all directors have cell phones, especially in the CVEs? Do you see a difference?
So we do have a cell phone number for every school. It is, our project works, and every CVE, our project works really closely. Some schools don't have staff keepers, some just have principals, some just have head teachers, right? And so our program is working to provide other support to the CVEs also, so they're able to get in touch with the CVEs. So we do, get that confirmation from them, but again, we also have our staff follow up.
Yeah, more question, Alfonso?
In Mozambique, do you distribute only the mother language textbooks? Because the Portuguese workbooks, as you know, go through the national distribution company, Diname, and if so, how do you relate to this company, to this government company?
So Diname does do the bulk of Mozambique book deliveries for sure. For the schools that our project is working with, our project took over book deliveries, so it's Portuguese and the 3 mother tongues.
So Diname does not distribute in those districts?
So Diname, correct,
So
for
you
the
pick
length
them
of our
up from
project.
Nakala or Nampula?
So we had, hold on, we had some books delivered into Maputo, which were then shipped by train to Zambezia. We had some books that were shipped by train through Zambia. And we basically had all of the books that the project helped the ministry procure come to central warehouses that our project then operated. So Diname actually isn't the official Mozambique distributor any longer. We had a lot of discussions about with Diname, but also with the ministry about Diname, and sort of trying to branch out and foster a better, what's the word?
More competitive.
More competitive, especially, but that's mostly only happening near Maputo and in the south so far, but they are working to sort of open it up.
Go ahead, ask your question, and we have one more group that wanted to.
Well, I had about 10, but I'll just ask one. So in Afghanistan, it was the vendor who labeled.
Yes.
And how did the vendor know how many books per school to pack in?
Our project did the distribution lists.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you worked with the MOE and then got the distribution list with the
Correct. And then we confirmed them with the schools, and then worked with we had a really close working relationship with our printer because they were in Kabul. It was like a 10-minute drive.
Okay.
They're across the street from the Ministry of Education.
And I just want to follow up on Afghanistan. So do you have a sense of, how ready the Afghan ministry is to assume the cost of doing this nationally? So 14,000 times, 25, 38, I don't know how many times we'd have to multiply that number.
Yeah, so that was the whole point that we sort of did a different costing structure with our vendor was to match something that the ministry would be familiar with. For example, data transaction costs, because they do have cell phones and they do pay for cell phones and cell phone access. We are in the process right now with them trying to figure out what actually is is feasible, right? We have a working group for book tracking. We also have the support of our steering committee. So there are a lot of other conversations going on. This was originally a proof of concept last March. We then expanded to try to test out different features and different functionalities that might work better with the ministry at their suggestion, those sorts of things. So in short, I can't answer your question right now, but we're trying to answer it right now.
Working group on book tracking sounds like a great idea.
We have one more question, and then I wanted to allow open EMIS to.
So just again about Afghanistan, just a note that there's this huge tender out right now for these 37 million books. The bid opening is about a week and a half, although there's some talk, maybe they'll extend it a little bit, but if it were possible to integrate some of this into that tender, I think that would be really exciting. I mean, it's just to the provincial level, so it's not all the way to the school, but even that I think would be a huge advance. So.
Yeah, Susan is on the phone, but that's been a lot of the conversations of it, and we're trying to distill out what we can do for that grant versus what we can do for the Afghanistan Children Reading Project. But long story short, it's I think accelerated some of the conversations with the ministry and the mission on how we could scale book.
But we would have to know like really soon because the bids are being prepared. Everything's.
Are you writing a response to it?
I wanted to.
I would never talk about that.
I'm not sure if anybody online has another question before we go on to.
I wanted to ask how verification is done at the warehouse to ensure that books for every school have been packed and have been packed in the required number. Because in some programs, you find that there is bulk number of books which are going to schools, and the number of schools are many. You may find 5,000 plus schools. So I just want to know how verification is done at the warehouse.
Verification of packaging the correct number of books for the school. Okay, so in Afghanistan, we had our project staff there working with our vendor to package the books correctly. In Mozambique, our staff actually did a lot of the packaging with some help from, we had a couple different vendors. So the delivery vendors that delivered from the printer to the warehouse, but also our delivery vendors that delivered from the warehouses to the schools. We're all basically in two warehouses packaging the books, right? And keeping track that way. So it was mostly our project staff that relied, and we did have district officials shadow that process. We hope to have them more integrated, but we ran into a couple constraints there. So they shadowed it this time. We'll be more involved in the future iteration in Mozambique. And then in Afghanistan, we also had some district and province officials working with us then.
Thank you so much for sharing with us about Afghanistan and Mozambique. And I wanted to give Community Systems Foundation a chance to present.
Hi, everybody. My name is Q Huang, and I'm also joined by John Cap, who will be coming in at the end of the presentation. I'm a user experience designer at TSF, and Community Systems Foundation is a nonprofit organization utilizing information technology for social. Our focus has always been in data collection, management, and dissemination. And our area of experience has been so about 2 years ago, we entered into the All Children Reading competition for Track and Trace. And we were one of the finalists chosen to conduct a field test in Malawi to test out our system. So based on what we found in Malawi, we were able to update our system and we released Openness Logistics version 2.0. And we were able to demonstrate our tool at the Gates Grand Challenges Conference in Washington, D.C. In October last year. And early this year in January, we presented and demonstrated the tool at the African Book Industry Stakeholders Workshop hosted by the Association for the Development of Education in Africa and the Global Book Alliance. So that's just a brief background and timeline of our tool. But let me get into how it actually works. You know, at its core, OpenEMIS Logistics is an accountability tool, and it gives communities access to information that otherwise they wouldn't have. So parents, teachers, and head teachers would have access to finding out the details of a shipment of books coming to their school. Shipments are managed centrally in the system. So that means that items can be packed into packages, and then packages can be further assigned or allocated to consignments. And multiple consignments can belong under one order. Now, the system allows for the initiation of a shipment. So multiple shipments can be initiated at once. And what this does is then it generates a shipment code, and it sends an SMS message to those community members who are subscribed to receive alerts. And once they receive this 8-digit shipment code, that's the key to query the system for more information on what books are coming, when the books are coming, who's delivering the books, where are the books now, and the status of the shipment. The status is updated by couriers and recipients, and in the system, statuses act as historical data of activities. And because shipments are centrally managed, you're able to see a dashboard view that gives you an overview of all of the shipments and the various statuses and the progress during the distribution cycle. You can also further manage and analyze the data from the system to see indicators such as number of books in schools, percentage of successful deliveries, percentage of unsuccessful deliveries, and number of users interacting with the system. So where are we now? The tool is ready. We are ready for piloting, and in fact, we've been in discussions in potential partnerships around different implementations around the world. And we've also been working on a costing model that adds only a few cents to the overall cost of a book. And this is based on a size of a distribution. So we have a small, medium, and a large scaling of costs. And I wonder if this is the right moment to share the screen, but I do have documentation on how we got to our costing. Perhaps I can share that a little bit later, and I think John can talk about that a little bit more after I go. One thing I wanted to emphasize to this group, and hopefully is a key takeaway for all of us, is the idea around partnerships. And I see 4 areas of partnerships. The first is in the private sector. I've heard there are publishers and printers and distributors who are contracted by the ministry in a decentralized way. So how can we partner with these groups of people? How can we also partner with telecom companies to help drive down the costs on SMS messages? So could we partner up with a telecom company that can provide us with a toll-free short code, for example? How can we also partner up with communities? Somebody mentioned before, incentivizing communities to engage with the system because they are the core drivers in keeping the distribution, the people related in the distribution of books accountable. And lastly, partnership with each other. We seem to have some similar and some experienced track and trace initiatives in this room. And how can we, use each of our strengths and work together in implementing track and trace for the distribution of books? Perhaps this is the right moment, John, for you to come in to talk about our work around the education management information systems, where we partner with ministries and further can track textbooks once they receive, once schools receive the books themselves.
Sure, thanks, Q, and thanks everyone. I hope this initiative Q described is called Open EMIS Logistics, and I think it probably is helpful for us to explain a bit about the overall project. We're partnering with UNESCO as a technical partner in supporting information system development in the education sector as a whole. And Open EMIS is a project that began there. What we see and have a lot of excitement for in this logistics project is the ability to, as we've just described, track a shipment to a school. And once the school receives that shipment, then register the books within the EMIS and track them further as they're being used and distributed to students. So we see it in a way as a holistic opportunity to not only support the track and trace of textbook deliveries, but then the further use of textbooks. And so from our perspective, this is a very exciting opportunity. The management of this tool, logistics, can fit very seamlessly with Open EMIS Core, which we would call it, for central management by an education system, for tracking and organization of the shipments, to very much watch for where there's gaps or weaknesses in the distribution system, and to bring in, as Q described, the community involvement to hold the system accountable for the delivery of books. So from our perspective, we're quite excited about rolling this out. Open EMIS Core is being used in many parts of the world in full-scale implementation, and we're very excited to talk about how Open EMIS Logistics could be applied with or without the core tool that we just described. I'll stop just by, perhaps we're doing this presentation a bit backwards, but to say, many of you may not know Community Systems Foundation. We're a small not-for-profit based out of New York, and we've been partnering with the UN for many years in support of statistical information system development, and we've worked in around 120 countries. So we're leveraging a lot of field experience in that regard and developing open source tools that we think can be sustainable solutions in education and beyond. Thanks for the time.
Is it possible to use the system offline, or is it only an online system?
So this system, the management of shipments does happen online. However, being able to update status of a shipment and also query information about a shipment can happen offline. And also you have the ability to scan barcodes. In particular, this would be a courier or delivery driver scanning barcodes using an offline application.
Q, this is Linda. I'm just wondering also if you could just say a word about the development of payment to publishers in that system. Is that connected in any way?
So we have explored the idea of integrating blockchain into this, and we were imagining through one party confirming the delivery of books and another party confirming the receipt of books. That will trigger the payment to the person or the actor that's responsible for that distribution. So we've explored this option, and we're looking at how best to align it in our track and trace tool. But it's definitely an exciting new technology and innovation to be considered in the track and trace initiative.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that blockchain, from our perspective, and the ability to move toward results-based financing is very exciting. In our initial design, that wasn't part of the functional requirements, but we really see that as something that could enhance the effectiveness of the system and the effectiveness of the project as a whole. So that's in our vision for development, and hope we have a chance to do that.
With TNT, has there been a case where schools did not receive books because the school's name order was skipped during packing at warehouse?
I'm sure.
I would imagine so. And I guess how are you maybe working to overcome those kinds of bumps?
I'm not sure that's a question for Community Systems Foundation specifically. I'm not sure we have an answer to that. It looks like one perhaps to a broader group. But, please let us know if you like our help and response.
I mean, since we've all been hacking away at this for 35 years, at least once that has occurred somewhere in some country somehow. Because one of the big questions we'll talk about after the break is just how fallible the ministry systems are for giving you the names of the schools, the numbers of students, and how many books they need, right? So if you're, let's imagine you're dealing with the Ghanaian Ministry of Education, for sure there'll be schools on the list that don't exist, and there'll be lists without schools that do exist. This will happen to you.
One thing, a note I've noticed
in my brief time working in education is that the warehouses that are packing these books are fairly rudimentary. They're often like getting day laborers, and so there is a lot of chance of challenges with packing because you've got, unsophisticated.
Sure. And I love Munir's description of warehouses without floors. So the entire bottom layer of the books, if they didn't come packaged in 2 batches of plastic, is not really distributable. It's going to be covered with absolutely all kinds of dirt.
Well, another huge issue that's coming up from the printer side is that we're getting requests to change the packing once books have already been shipped. And so everyone needs to realize that then that requires unpacking of all of these books in these rudimentary warehouses and repacking of all of these books by day laborers or people who are hired just for this task, because we don't necessarily have staff at all of these locations. So there are huge risks there if that happens once the books have been packed at origin.
In the systems analysis, there has to come way ahead from the Ministry of Education side when they develop the specifications, so that the way that the books will be distributed or packed should be written into the specifications for publishing or printing, like how many copies to be banded, how many copies to be shrink wrapped, how many copies to the box. Beyond that, it is virtually impossible for an ideal. What the ideal usually is to get a carton to the classroom without being opened. Because once the carton is open, shrinkage happens. So so the ideal for every distribution system is to get that carton. Oh, there's another ideal, which is to have an undernourished 12-year-old boy able to carry a carton. So once you go out to the remote parts of the country, the teacher says, you look at the boxes. So the UN index is 20% of the body mass of a boy should be about the weight of the carton for a book box.
Had 3 different groups, and I wanted to give a chance to the online group some of the major points that were made in discussions, the challenges that were brought up, the ideas that were shared. So I wanted to let the groups that were in this room go first. Since our folks online were able to save the third, and then we'll end with the third group in terms of sharing some of the things that they have in their, that they discussed in their session. So maybe we'll start with Sunny.
Okay.
Sunny discussed software design and functionality, and then maybe you could tell us a little bit about something you shared, about 10 minutes.
Sure thing. Okay. So we had the lovely task of designing a whole system, specifically the software portion, but I decided to take it back a bit and look at, before we jump into design, we want to look at who are the principal stakeholders, who might be the secondary stakeholders, and their needs for data could differ, or the way they interact in the system could differ. So looking at that before we go too far down the design aspect, and we had such a terribly short period of time. I wish we had a longer period of time, because this is really fun, and we had a great group. But looking at principal stakeholders, of course, there are the project staff who is implementing the system are going to always be the first users, but looking at how are they going to transfer it off to the MOE, the people who would be the eventual users of the system, but not just the MOE. We looked at, well, the private actors who might be stakeholders in the system, the publishers and printers who might actually be somebody interacting with the system, feeding data in, getting data out. So how can we design a system that is not only accommodating MOE people, as well as real end users, teachers, parents, etc., but those private stakeholders, printers. Some of the things we talked about, and we talked about a whole lot, we're going to, I suppose, circulate a lot of these notes around to everybody, but I know I don't have a lot of time. But if we look at dashboard design, many of the systems out there have some sort of dashboard, but in our group, we sort of well agreed that dashboard notification should go all the way from the printer all the way down to the lowest level. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was sort of a unanimous agreement there. and of course, down to the community level, if as far as you can go. Moving away from dashboard design, we then jump to, well, how can we look at, with all of these different stakeholders, how can we design for error within a system? Different stakeholders with different levels of digital literacy, ways that they might input, let's say they're using SMS or a smartphone, they could introduce error into the system. How can we catch it so that we're not causing them to incur more data cost or SMS costs, etc. Talked a little bit about that. I'm probably going over, but we also looked at the stakeholders. When we look at our principal stakeholders, for example, the MOE or governmental actors, their use of the system could even differ province by province or state by state in how their processes are run. So that's something that could perhaps influence the system design. So as you see, we weren't really making the software of a system or designing things. We were going back and looking at the stakeholders. I wanted to talk so much more about other things like designing for malice. How can we get around people gaming the system? We could create an attack tree and see what are all the possible and impossible avenues of attack into a system, because we're really making cool systems, but we're going to be reaching the next level where our users in the field are going to be real smart. Cambodia, we're finding, hey, they've leapfrogged way ahead. They're going to know how to attack a system. They're going to know how to subvert it. How are we designing for that? We didn't get to talk about that. I want to talk about that. That could be a whole other day, but anyway.
Could you just wind that tape back? Create an attack tree?
Yeah, well, just avenues of attack into a system and how you might be able to
I was
get a
taking
book.
notes. I'm like, create
I've got slides. I'll show you.
Okay.
Okay,
Sounds amazing.
that was our group.
Any comments or questions from online or in the room?
One comment that I had in terms of design of the system and design of the dashboard or even the user interface is to be willing to put more money towards user testing.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
we throw around words like co-design and those sorts of things, and sometimes you literally cannot do that, whether it be time or security or whatever. But instead of trying to look at it as a challenge of trying to make sure nobody can subvert it because they're going to be attacking it, is trying to, obviously, if they're smart enough to subvert it, right?
Yes,
Which people are, they would be,
Yeah.
smart enough to help design it and create it also. Not saying that that's an easy thing, but to make sure that that's included in budgets for implementation.
Yes.
Oftentimes it's not.
Yes, it is. I would say most times not included in budgets. A lot of times people don't get it out to the user early. Yeah.
Time.
In time, yeah. Good point, great point.
I'm sorry, no, Jen. Nope.
That's what we're used to.
Sunny, I know, so your group was the software or the...
Yes.
So we've heard different examples of different platforms. There's both open source and proprietary. And in terms of expansion, it makes me think of, is it like EMIS systems? Like ministries are being bombarded with all sorts of choices.
Yes.
About, and having competition is not a bad thing. But is there some way to sort of systematize common functionalities or features to avoid ministries of education who may not have a lot of expertise being able to wrap their heads around, like, I want that system, but I'm not familiar with like all the terms or software or hardware that you're describing.
Right. That's a very good point. It's something that probably could happen, but there might be a step even further back where looking at, to your point about EMIS systems, looking at EMIS codes and how those are used. And there are some standards there, but there are also many countries who are starting to differ and change their codes based on things that they have learned in country to be a little bit better. And so what we thought we could have standardization in just EMIS codes is we're starting to see changes now in that. So yes, But looking further back up this whole chain, there are other areas where some standards might be.
I just wanted to.
Yes.
I just want to add that developing together with all the different things here, a common data vocabulary that we could all use, and that it matches it matches the different indicators that we have to meet. There's this new indicator about the complete classroom sets. So if we design based on this common data model, whatever technology we put on top, it wouldn't matter if we use one brand or another brand or open source, but if we do it something that standardizes the data, it will be.
Good point.
Thanks. It's a great idea.
I had a comment to make about designing features and all, and this is something we are facing. So just I wanted to share. I think it's a challenge and to design for a reading project versus designing for ministry adoption outside a project. And I think we should really, if the goal is the latter, it might sometimes mean that we have to rethink how we potentially do traditionally procurement and getting to our schools in our project to mirror what's done with the ministry, and that's something that I think we should really take seriously if that's what we wanted to make happen with every book track and trace system that we do.
Good point. Very good. Any other questions, observations, comments?
Sunny, I had a quick question. This is Q from CSF.
Yes.
In your discussions around identifying the various stakeholders, you mentioned that you pointed the ministry as one potential principal stakeholder, but also the private sector, like the publishers and those that are sort of decentralized and responsible for distribution. Probably you didn't have enough time, but was there some sort of solution suggested around what the design of a logistics system could look like for the two different use cases?
Yes, we have a full use case diagram. I'll send it to you. No, that's a good question, Q. Good question. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to jump into solutions, but just merely identifying that private portion and the printer-publisher link as an integral actor in the system was helpful, but as far as a design or moving to a solution, unfortunately, we didn't have time for that.
Thank you.
But I can think of some things. I'll send them.
Or we could prize incentivize it.
Yeah.
Everyone can go to their lab and do whatever people in labs do to make those things.
Cool.
Allison? Okay, so our group had the series of questions about community involvement. What roles have communities played in track and trace initiatives? What roles could they potentially play? What are incentives that might be needed to encourage community level participation in track and trace? So I'm just going to summarize kind of some key outcomes across the questions. I think the first point that everyone mentioned was that involving communities is by no means easy. There's a lot of assumptions that underlie a lot that's related to community involvement, that, for example, if you involve communities, everything is transparent, right? Their role is supposed to be to inject this accountability and transparency that may not exist in the government system or some other system, but community groups, communities, of course, they have their own issues. If you've ever worked with them, so-and-so's in-law, and that leads to infighting and lack of trust, and you can have, resources being siphoned off of as well from time to time. So this assumption that involve the community and all will be well and transparent is not one to go into this with. And that community initiatives can be really hard to scale as well because it's so intensive in terms of getting community groups to understand maybe what's going on. There's a lot of change and fluidity with community groups that the person who's the president of the PTA or the school management community this year may not be the same person next year. So it can be very time and resource intensive to get communities on board. So all of those caveats aside, I think there is an agreement that getting communities to be aware of what's happening in schools with the school resources that they should be caring about because their kids are in school, or maybe their kids aren't in school, but why should they care about this? So we talked about the incentive of needing to have parents understand why is it important that their child has a book. It's important so that their kid learns to read and their kid can learn other subjects and their kid can pass various exams to continue to move up the education chain. And there's some programs that have done some efforts on community involvement that or sensitization around early grade reading. You could see something growing out of that where there was a role of a school management committee or parents to find, does their own child have a book? And then how many books are available in the school through posting of the information that their school should have this many books. There's some work in Afghanistan that's hopefully going to happen around that. There was a point that was mentioned from the Afghanistan project that just though putting up information doesn't necessarily mean a parent or a community member can engage it. The example was like there was a complaint line. If no parents, no community members ever gave any feedback, although it was very useful for principals. But so what are all the efforts that need to be made around getting communities to really engage? And I think we all agreed there'd be a lot more comprehensiveness to programs. We talked a lot about coordination among donors and organizations as being really important. You gave the example of Malawi or Mozambique, where there was different partners. Save the Children was involved in, Rwanda. Save the Children had the community-related work, but then to monitor, do this kind of track and tracing of materials with somebody else. So coordination among donors, coordination among sectors, ag and health sectors were mentioned. There's a lot of short codes, and farmers are supposed to be able to, text a short code and get all the information on markets and weather and things. So why can't we coordinate with these sectors around these technologies that maybe are already down at this level that the education sector hasn't tapped into? So anybody in the group, did I miss a key point? There's a lot more that could be said.
Any thoughts, comments, questions? Fatigue? Does anybody online have anything to?
Hello, this is Limo. I would like to give comment on the community involvement on track and trace. If I heard well, is that also mentioned that it may be challenging because some community leaders, for example, the school committee members are coming to leaving after a certain period of time. But I think to make this sustainable, we need to work with the head of schools that when, for example, a community member who was involved in track and trace is no longer, for example, a leader in that particular community or is no longer involved, we should build the capacity of the head of schools or someone at the school who can set them the new incoming leaders of the community who can set their phones track and trace system which is existing and working with that particular school. I'm not sure how it works at down level, if there are any setting which they need to do in order to access the track and trace system, but I think this knowledge could be transferred to the school level. When someone has left the school, for example, community, and someone is coming in at the school level, they should be able to put him or her in the system. That's my comment.
Just to add to Limo, Sunny and Sarah, when we were doing our alpha field test in Malawi, we went to different schools to train and build capacity on parents engaging the system through SMS. And the story that I do keep telling is, it's a quite encouraging one, is when I went back to the hotel room, I was able to see the teachers the parents, excuse me, who are trained were sharing what they learned with other parents in the communities, because I continued receiving more SMS queries from people I didn't recognize from that day. And so that was quite an encouraging one. And if we were to have that short code or toll-free number, I'm sure that number will increase.
Rebecca? Since no question is stupid, it came up a lot in the morning, or it was mentioned a couple of times that there had been hesitancy or sort of non-receptivity around the use of the SMS. What were the trends behind that? I was a little surprised to hear that, actually. I hadn't thought I would hear that.
It's expensive.
It costs, right?
More,
you have to
it
have
costs
some
more money to send an SMS and to receive one than it does to send a Facebook message or some kind of chat. I mean, that's most often. Or they just aren't familiar. Sending a text, I think in Arabic also is very different than sending, a short code or something. So there's differences.
Okay.
Yeah. You have to have a data connection, whereas the SMS connections are much more widespread in a lot of places.
Yeah, I mean, the money, I can see why that's a problem. I just didn't come in thinking, oh, SMS would be hard, precisely because of that. You can usually get an SMS out.
Well, there's like Facebook, so in Cambodia, so Facebook is getting sensible in that. There's kind of like a version you can get where it uses less data. So they're getting smarter, so you can just use the messenger, so there's like ways where they use very, very little data, and that costs them basically nothing.
Highly able to be manipulated at not much cost. Facebook, we love it. Good point, though. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Becca, not necessarily for track and trace, but when we tried to use SMS in other places for other things, it just depends on the country. Like, for example, in Liberia, there weren't as many smartphones, and literally people's screens were always broken.
Yes.
So they couldn't see. So there were literacy issues with actually using the old phone, click, 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 that's the S. Toot, toot, toot. So, it's not a smartphone, it's like the old, so to write a text message takes a long time. And then sometimes you can't even read it because your screen is broken. So we had a lot of, it wasn't as wide, it wasn't as usable as we had thought it would be.
Right. I guess I came in with exactly that thought. Oh, that would be a way to go. Maybe not.
Just depends.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you have to really go into a country and look at how people use it.
I would say it does make sense in some cases, and if you're at the right level and the quantity can be controlled, I think SMS is actually a good medium. So it all, I just echoing everyone, it all depends, right? In Cambodia, it probably doesn't make sense to use SMS, but in the Zambia context, it made a lot of sense for us.
And you can partner with the telecom company, and you have a different arrangement.
Right. About partnering with those telecom companies, Tony.
Ryan, it does make me think of the point that you had mentioned in terms of the transaction cost for the pilot versus nationwide deployment.
Yeah.
Is I could see being part of our project is that you can negotiate or build in the costs of that SMS, whatever that technology is. But if ultimately what you want to do is you want to have that be a track and trace system that's used nationally, then there is going to be cost ramifications that you have to anticipate.
Yeah.
But it is intriguing what you said. There might be a relationship there that you cultivate with the private sector provider, that you get them involved in the early stages of which, and then it's like a competitive space that they want to offer preferential rates to be able to do this system at a national level. So that could be part of an early partnership opportunity.
I mean, with one of the providers, and when we were testing, they basically gave us hundreds of free SIM cards to give to principals to be able to send messages for free. Plus, they get the principals onto the network. So it all depends.
The problem was that they were out of network anyway.
But they were out of network.
they had no coverage, but yeah, I mean, there are examples. I mean, in Afghanistan too, just one other example is like the Ministry of Afghanistan actually has a hotline already set up that they use for complaints. And so there's there's a short code and there's two options. And so one option that we're exploring is adding a third option that would be a complaint line for receiving materials or not, right? So building in an existing system that the ministry already has that relationship with the MNO. And so you have to call in, it's not text, but
We do have PPP with Orange in 2 countries, and in both cases, well, particularly in Senegal, we are making sure that Orange is also talking to the Ministry of Education. So it's a 3-way right now, but with a pathway to a 2-way between Orange and the MOE, so we can again extract ourselves and have that continue
Like for
at scale.
preferential rates or?
For many other things, but yes.
And there can be a model for incentivizing the private sector, as was talked about earlier. In other education projects that was solved when the task was how to make sure that a central grant can reach the school. And reaching the school meant depositing it to a bank that's near the school. So that became the competitive incentive that the government put out. So the banks competed for the best rates that they can offer that can get the teacher salaries to as close to the school as possible. In contrast to the old way where the teacher has to be absent for 2 days because she has to go to the district office and sign for her pay envelope and be robbed on the way back. So.
We'd like to go on to the last group and so I'm going to just give some of the challenges that emerged in the group discussion, and then we have 3 ideas that emerged on how to tackle the whole issue of capacity building and change management. So some of the key challenges that came up were, first of all, that paper-based ways of tracking books is inefficient, and we all know that. A second area in terms of capacity building was the teachers themselves need capacity building. School officials that are monitoring teachers need capacity building. And then heads of warehouses need capacity building. Another area that was talked about was in terms of use, and that's at the local level. So how are the teachers actually using the books? That also was an issue that was raised around capacity building. The question around cost also was raised in terms of a system that we just talked about on using a technology solution is costly. So how do we work on that? And then finally, the last area was on policy. And this was government policy around accountability. So moving from the government level down to the local level, if a child loses a book, for example, the teacher then has to pay for that book to be replaced. That's a direct contradiction to what we're trying to do in terms of getting a book to a school and making books free to children. So policy issues were also an area that we talked about. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca for some of ideas, and then others.
One idea.
One idea.
So Linda had asked us to pick out, a theme that had come out of the discussion that really seemed like a major idea to hang on to. And I think we've said it a lot this morning, but the first one we agreed was a good piece related to capacity building is that you really do have to work within the system that you have and that you find on the ground. You can't sort of mastermind this in your lab somewhere and then come in with your track and trace tech solution because you haven't really thought about what you're problem solving for, and you haven't really thought about what your actual people in your actual context can or can't do at any given point in your chain. So really the job around track and tracing doesn't begin with the technology. It begins with understanding whatever paper, print, or other system may be in place in the place that you are. That being said, our group did not really answer my major question, which boiled down to, in the Republic of Mali, where there's a law on the books saying that every child will have a French book and a math book, and that law has been on the books for well nigh 20 years, and you can go into any classroom and there are no such books on any such table. And yet there is a French system in place, very well established, and everyone knows what the forms are and what the signatures are and how these books are supposed to be distributed, and yet there's money from all the donors behind the book distributions. What do we do to incentivize the extant system to get the books to the kids? And so I think something we've not unpacked this morning is really, is results-based financing an answer to that? Should we do RBF in Mali, and would that put that extant system into function such that we could then look at it and kind of tinker with where can technology help? Or are there other options than RBF for moving things along and making a system do what the system is there to do? Should we, Kate had the great idea, we should just completely ignore the government system and let the free market solve the problem, which we discussed as an option for efficiency. But that being said, you have to start with what you've got and work within the system that you've got, but really the questions around changing behavior and capacity building have to do with shifting the incentives to make it such that it's more profitable for the people in the system to do the job they know they're supposed to be doing than to do something else. And whether that's technology or a different financing scheme or a different balance of roles between public and private, we didn't get a chance to unpack all of that, but we felt like that was really the key to capacity building. Maybe they don't need really help knowing where to sign on the form. That's not the capacity we're looking for. So. One for you or number two?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about was we've seen some success, particularly in health commodities, in using ELMIS systems, logistics management and information systems. And we were wondering, could we apply some of those processes to education? And some of these processes actually respect the paper-based system, while at the same time bringing it more into this century. So I think that's something interesting to look into. We'll be looking at that on the Command Honduras project, which I work on. So.
I think Kate had
yeah, so one thing that I want to bring up is that oftentimes, so yes, there is an existing system. Most governments have a system that they use. It might be paper-based, it might not be. You do have to work within it and around it, but oftentimes it can also be useful to give a proof of concept, even if that might be a little bit different or very different, because giving feedback on something that exists that you can see and look at and, you know, watch the sort of process play out is a lot easier than asking someone to explain what they want and to detail what they want, right? For example, asking a Ministry of Education what exactly it is that they want on a report, which you then make for them perfectly, and then you get a lot of feedback that wasn't what they wanted, right? And so, again, just giving a proof of concept, giving an example, even though it might not mimic the system perfectly, initially can be useful. And then one thing that I wanted to bring up too is that some of the assumptions that we make around digital book tracking systems, for example, the assumption that paper-based is not as efficient, that can sometimes be dangerous, especially when you get to the more minute level, right? Especially when you're getting to the school level. If a teacher doesn't know how to use a tablet, and if the school does not have a tablet and the school does not have a charger for that tablet, it is not useful for that teacher to distribute books and keep that on a ledger on a tablet. So that's an assumption that, yes, as a broad scheme, technology can make things a little bit more efficient, can give data in real time, but to also recognize that the systems that are in place are there for maybe a good reason. So.
I think there was a question that came online about other types of stakeholders, including booksellers, I think, being part of this change management. So I wasn't sure if anybody wanted to speak to that.
The exact question was from Lily, and she asked if since a lot of these are tailored at the ministries of education and publishers, what about the other stakeholders like booksellers in countries where the book chain is working? And Lily, if you want to clarify anything, please jump in.
Well, this is exactly what I was thinking about, because I know that there are problems on the ground, but you know, there are situations where things are really working and books are getting to schools. So I don't know, I was wondering if, for instance, instead of just targeting the publishers and the Ministry of Education, we can also target booksellers in these track and trace initiatives and see how we can rope them in terms of ensuring that since they've been entrusted to the work of getting books to the schools, then they're also enabled to have a system where they can also track and trace how books move from their shops to the schools, for instance.
Makes me think of Alfonso's comment about the second part of the policy paradox, in part.
Did you want to say something about that, Alfonso?
Second part of your comment.
What did I say?
Having the bookseller market is
in many systems, provision of books is centralized. It comes from a central source and it's distributed all over. The other system is the decentralized, where schools order books which are approved at the central system. We're talking more about the first, where books kind of filter down to every school. The problem there is, as I said, when Little Mansetsa loses her book, there's no way of replacing it, because only the government has produced it. Now, in one country that I've seen, what the government did was, as soon as the government edition was out, they turned around and opened the license to all publishers. For 1,000 pesos, you can print it in color, you can reprint it, etc., provided you tell us, the government, how much you're selling it for. We would like to know. So providing this in the open market gives an incentive for booksellers to begin to stock the books for those little books that are lost, number one. And number two, it provides a disincentive for resurrection men, those that steal books from government warehouses and puts them in the wet market. If they are in legitimate places, in stationery shops and bookshops on the market, then parents would go there and buy the books, rather than buy something that clearly says on the back, Propiedad del Ministerio de Educación. I mean, it's clearly not what you want to do. But if it's clear on the cover that this is a commercial edition, pay only 3 pesos and 50 centavos, then the parents know that they're doing good business, they're supporting their local bookshop, and that's the way that books can become more available, and to ease the burden on the central government of having to supply everything. At some point, these little bookshops become little publishing houses, and they begin to publish other things like stories for children. So then we get something else going than textbooks.
I had a kind of question, comment in relation to your point about the incentives. Like, what is the incentive for the government to do this type of, track and tracing when there have been systems in place? And maybe it's also for the programs that have had these experiences. We kind of assume like there isn't an incentive, or people are doing things just because they don't want to, or there's some sort of bad, reason. But when you look at the institution, the government, often it's nobody's job, or there's not enough staff, or it's like requires a person who has skills or can bring together and has the mandate to bring together people in M&E, EMIS, IT. I mean, we were just saying, even within our projects, we often silo these things, and then things can fall apart. So within a ministry, are we looking to say, well, what is the capacity and the institutional org chart that would allow them to actually do this really well, not just that, they don't want to kind of attitude.
That's a great point. It makes me think of Weir's presentation, because he had stressed that, after their second or third failed try, one of the things they had to really go and map was the roles and responsibilities, like who's really supposed to do what here. So yeah, absolutely. Not all, I do have to admit, after all these many decades, I'm more skeptical than maybe I should be, or more cynical, or whatever it is. But not all ministries are selling books over the border to the richer markets in Ivory Coast. Some are just confused. Not all are mercenary.
But there is value in defining whose role it is and whose responsibility it is, and making sure that everybody in the supply chain knows who's got what role at what point in the supply chain.
And who you're accountable to, all the way up.
Then you get some accountability.
Yeah. Linda, I wanted to say, Lily, your comment brings me to something provocative that I was going to say and then planned not to say, and now I'm going to say, which is, I think it's great. We barcode boxes of books, and that's fantastic. What if we barcoded books? Each book. Because how would a bookseller do what you're talking about, Lily, at that local level without knowing sort of exactly how many books were there and what they were doing with each and every one of the books they were selling? So do we actually need to track books, not boxes of books? I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no, I'm just asking a question and now we don't have to answer it.
We had a conversation with our printers, and the printers could not do it for the money. It's an expensive task.
Exactly.
It's also for the margin of error that you're trying to calculate the difference between the loss of number of boxes and the loss of number of books it doesn't really help you implement. You still have to get the same, the same boxes, right? You still have to replenish it, right? So in terms of knowing you need 302 books versus 10 boxes at $30 each.
And the capacity is just not there. It'll be like Eritrea. When you enter, you record your cell phone, your laptop, and everything. But who's checking? Who has all that information?
Well, I know we did look at the issue about barcoding individual books. That was definitely part of our, and the one issue, of course, had to do with the place that you just put the books together, like the margin of error, like having to make sure that you relate all those books for individual. But I know one idea, Sarah and John and Q are on the phone. We did talk about once those books get to the school, like you could number the books, like physically. And then Arini and I don't know if you want to share an idea in terms of then a co-ownership of that book that extends beyond just getting the book to the school. Arini, I don't know if you wanted to mention your idea.
Sure, and then we're thinking that when the child gets the book, the parent or caregiver can send a text message to a centralized point of contact where they give the serial number of the book, the individual number of the book, and the name of the child. And perhaps we can collect all of these children's names and make like a huge poster of millions of children who have received books. I don't know. But this way we will know that the child actually has the book. Because as Linda mentioned earlier, unfortunately in some cases, the teacher is accountable for these books, and they're so afraid that they will have to pay out of pocket that they won't allow the children to take the books home. So
one thought I just was having is in pharmaceuticals, we have batches of pharmaceuticals, and you have a barcode per batch. It's not necessarily a barcode for every bottle. Every bottle that's the same. Like in books, you have an ISBN number as your barcode, but that's the same on every single book that uses that item. And this is the barcode for the batch, so that in the marketplace, in many countries, you can get your phone and you can find out if it's a real product, right? So that you don't get a counterfeit. You could do that with books, I suppose, where you barcode a batch that's different for each batch, and you could say this batch is for the ministry, so this barcode for these books is for our ministry books, and if you saw them in the market, you can ministry or from. That's what tracing.
Melvin, did you want to say something about, from the publisher's perspective, printer's perspective, how that would look, tracing?
Sure. Just having recently moved into the world of printing, we've been talking a lot about how we could contribute to this effort in terms of printing barcodes. We've also been discussing stamps that can be read with ultraviolet light, which is incredibly inexpensive. And we've done it in a couple of countries for other sectors. And so it's not something that you can just see, you have to read it with the light, but you could then trace it back to a particular school. I guess the thing I wanted to bring up today is that we're interested in doing some research on this with the Global Book Alliance. So it's good to hear all of these ideas, and then we'll keep talking about how we could contribute, because really anything that we can print onto books at scale at the time, obviously, of initial printing, it's very inexpensive. And so we're committed to doing, whatever we can at that point to help this effort.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks very much. We have notes that we're going to share from each of the sessions and that we're going to distribute afterwards, but I hope that
the online group, the group that's online, got some good information from the other two groups.
Yes, how many of your parents? Yesterday, I had to go to in Arlington a courtroom where Virginia, children who are given driver's license, children have to go in front of a court and a judge gives the child a driver's license. Right?
Been there, done that.
Been there, done that. And so that was sort of very exciting. And in some respects, I kind of think of this about this conversation about track and trace. I remember years ago when Penelope, Sunny, Rebecca's talked about track and trace, that we really wanted to get to this point where we had a number of different iterations of this project that we were able to then see expansion. And I really want to thank those pioneers that are both represented in the room, but also online, that are helping us make this case for the importance of transparency and accountability in our book distribution. In some respects, you're helping lead the way. So one question would be, how do we help you? I mean, in regards to, both at a community level with an organization like World Vision or at USAID doing solicitations, what suggestions would you have as we want to see track and trace be more adopted and integrated? So I just want to open the floor to see if there's any general suggestions that you might have as we're looking at a global level and trying to influence our colleagues and others working in this space.
And so one thing, as you know, I've always been sort of frustrated with the speed of things and how long it takes to get things going. And, I was hoping that we'd have a lot more pilots going by now. It's great to see the work that Creative and Comotics and EDC have been doing. It's super exciting. But one way that we could expand this quickly is if it's written into the technical specifications when book procurement is done. It's so easy for us. So we tend to print and then partner with distributors. So it'd be very easy for us to work with our distributors to ensure that they're using these systems. But it just needs to be upfront in the technical specifications so that when we bid on things, this is also included, it's included in the cost, it's included in the award, everyone knows what the expectations are. And if that happened, we could see lots of pilots going on and full-scale pilots going on pretty quickly. Yeah.
And I know that was the vision.
Yeah.
And what's really exciting about track and trace is it's a system level. So any other terrific suggestion? We would love to see track and trace included in solicitations and work quite hard, and also know the role that our implementing partners and other collaborators can have just to raise awareness of track and trace. You're doing great work in this space, but the venues that we cover and embrace in terms of our day-to-day work, we want to socialize this concept of track and trace. That's another good way that you guys can help us. Before pivoting the question and concluding with Rebecca, any other suggestions about how we could help you guys in sort of moving forward track and trace?
Any outreach that I think aid can do to the private sector on this would be really, really tremendous. And this is, again, just getting out of the business of IPs, now becoming distributor experts. I mean, why not? We're expert in everything else.
That was the last one. You already are one.
Truly, I mean, I really see ourselves as facilitators in this, and I don't necessarily, we're going to go back and have another conversation as a company, but I'm not sure that the solution is for us to now come up with our own proprietary economics, the best that. I really would much rather see this, because I'm just speaking for me. Super as everyone else in my room, but we really want to facilitate a private sector government partnership here and get out of the business of being in the business. If you really, truly mean that, this is where it is. So I think
Greg would be so proud of you.
Who knew? So, to the extent that aid can be a convener at that level, there are people doing this in other places. Let's look at where it's working. Let's work at where it's working. Let's look at how the industry works when it's at its finest. And it probably is not the DRC. I can guarantee you. We can guarantee you it is not in the DRC. But let's look at where it is working, and let's look at the people who actually do this for a living and who get paid to do this for a living, and make sure that those connections are happening with the ministries and the government.
Yeah.
And I have lists of multiple distributors that could be convened.
Great. Absolutely.
We will do that.
Sterling suggestion. Ian?
To a comment that Rebecca made earlier, I think track and trace only sheds a light on the process. It does not. I think the step after that, and that's been an important discussion for us, as to how do we make this thing actionable from the get-go. It'll be good to understand, and I think the RBF is a great example. And if that's the main vision for this, that's great. But I think it'll be good if we could get more information from USAID and others as to what exactly is the theory of change here, and how do we go about, even after we have a system, how, what system is only going to do as much as shed light. How do we go beyond that?
Well, that's great. So in addition to sort of this being a great event, and I want to thank Rebecca and Jennifer and her colleagues for being able to convene us together. So we'll do the applause in just one moment. I did want to say, also think in terms of your relationship or roles as partners or implementing partners, and changing sort of that relationship to think about. If there is a solicitation, Laura, we were talking about this in terms of silos. The reason why the community engagement piece might be separate than the book distribution piece is that within that same organization, those teams aren't talking to each other. That might be an opportunity for, in response to a solicitation or in conversations with colleagues, to basically say, think about how these pieces fit together, right? And so what can you do to respond and include sort of creative ideas? We'd like to see, one of the earlier examples of this was the World Bank had done a project in Uganda. Some of you may be familiar with this. They were actually using something like Track and Trace to get feedback from the parents about the quality of the books themselves. So you could see, once you've set up a Track and Trace system, like being able to sort of like, what's the value of it? How's that book? Is it a good book? How do we sort of build in some possibilities once you've connected that stream to be able to get additional information back to help strengthen the education system? So that's just to throw out in terms of an opportunity as well, as help us extend links within your own institutions and help socialize this as well. Without further ado, I want to turn it over now to the Rebeccas to conclude, and with great thanks for being able to convene us together. So let's do a small round of applause. Rebecca, she left. Yeah, she had to go.
Sorry.
We have like 4 Rebeccas in the room.
Yes. I thought Rebecca Leahy was going to talk just a little bit. That's fine.
Yeah.
There's no thanks needed on my end. The thank you goes to all of you. This is, as I said, something we've all struggled with forever. And, I have vivid memories of 1994 and diving off the truck to get the books out of the ditch and then giving them to the kid that had to truck them up the hill in Saracori to the school on his head. We're still struggling through the muck on how do we get the books to the children. And we've got some clear takeaways for USAID. We've got our homework cut out for us. We need to change how we're writing our solicitations. We need to help our officers in the education offices in the field know what to put in their procurements, know how to then allow for costs, and even maybe some time, a little time, to work within these systems and then try to improve them, or just drop them and go to the free market. I do feel like this work is all about our questioning how much of the status quo we're willing to feel okay about in our own consciences. And, this is something that really working with Penelope challenged me to think about almost every day. But, if you think back a few years, we all sort of nodded our heads sadly when we realized that the student-to-book ratio in a place like Chad was, 1 book for 8 students. Oh, well, isn't that sad? It's just how things are in Chad, right? And you'd read the stat in the UN report and you'd move on with your day and have your Starbucks. And I feel like as a community, we've actually taken that step forward to challenge that status quo amongst ourselves and to say, you know what, in our projects, it won't be like that anymore. It will always be at least 1 book per child. End of story. We're not doing this book sharing thing. And we've all done it in the past, right? We've all gone to USAID missions and said, well, this budget isn't big enough to do 1 book per child, so we're going to do 4 books per kid. Looking right at somebody who worked on a country and in projects where we did that. We moved past that status quo. We said, aid said, hey, we're going to put the money behind it. It'll be 1 book per child, which is still, far from what we need. But we moved from one status quo to another by saying there's something we're just not going to play around with anymore. And to some degree, I feel like this work is in that category where we don't want to play around with losing the books anymore. We don't want to play around with sort of nodding our heads sadly when the ministry person says to us, oh, the devils took that container, which has literally happened to me. It's just a status quo we want to get beyond. And so we have all these options for how to get beyond it. We've got all these lessons learned about start with your ministry system. Don't build things that can't work if you're a DC in the Munir crowd who are, trying something sophisticated and really all that northern Nigeria can handle is an Excel table and a Word document. work within what you've got and then make it just that little bit better. That's our common task. And we on the donor side have to find the money and the time for you to do it. We have to go back to the table with our friends at the bank and GPE and say, what are we doing about this at a national level? And to borrow a phrase from Penelope, as we go forward, we need to try to make only new mistakes and not make the old mistakes. So this whole event has been about, hearing from each of us what we've done in the past, what we think went well, what we want to see happen in the future. And as we continue to work together and coagulate all that and get it out to you and keep the dialogue going, the work will be about taking this kind of thing to scale, and as we do it, making only new mistakes. So let's keep going. That's it.